Hello, I'm Mantastic and Fantastic, and today I'm going to be talking about team building for Puzzle and Dragons in 2018, featuring Yusuke, Beach Barber and Julie, Dark Metatron, and Edward. So, team building in Puzzle and Dragons is an invaluable skill because you have to be able to look at a dungeon and determine the safest and or most efficient path to victory. Like, having a strong team is great and all, but having the correct team is more important. Kind of building off on that, like if you can puzzle well, yes, that is helpful, but if you're using the wrong team, it's kind of like you're trying to use a wrench to push a nail into a wooden board. It's not going to work as efficiently as if you had a hammer. You need the right tools and of course the right ability to use them. So this article and video here will be focusing on what I basically think when I'm trying to build a team to basically counteract a dungeon at hand. So at this point in time, teams with high effective amounts of health, so basically either high health or high damage reduction, tend to be the most favorable because they are able to withstand the largest amounts of punishment, and that's important for Altarina, which is endgame content, because there are 145,000 damaging preemptive strikes, and if you are able to survive them without using an active skill, that is invaluable because you basically just freed up an entire active skill slot and you're better able to counter the other mechanics in the dungeon. So, nowadays, team building is nowhere near as rigid or restricted as it used to be. For those players who have been playing since like the Raw Dragon days where you had to have 2 Dark Callies, Isis, and Indra to really succeed, you kind of know that that was quite rigid and unforgiving. For myself, I still have never even got a Dark Callie, so I couldn't even use Raw Dragon, I believe, if I rolled him, so that is kind of weird. But the point of the matter is, we have more cards available now than we did in the past that can fulfill similar types of roles, so there is a large degree of flexibility. Of course, there are still going to be subs that are better than others, but it's not kind of as black and white as it used to be. There's tons of gray area now, so it's a matter of finding the correct solution and the best workaround you have for your given monster box. So, due to the popularity of this post thus far, I plan to kind of release a more expanded version of this, at least for more types of teams and more in-depth narration and commentary for each individual leader, kind of to replace that popular leaders and their full sublist post that I had in the past. That was my most popular article by far. Like, it is a nice article, but it's hard to maintain just the way that pad works, and when Skill Inheritance came out, the format kind of just fell apart. So I feel like this could be a good way to kind of move forward overall. So, Puzzle and Dragons is a, well, puzzling game. Like, it's not as black and white of rock, paper, scissors mechanics where, like, rock beats scissors, that sort of idea. Like, it's not as rigid like that, but there are solutions or various solutions to given problems. And I want to basically just kind of give an overview of what makes a strong leader at this point in time. So choosing the right leader is important. Like, you want to try and utilize a leader that gives you the highest chance of success, but also a leader that you have a monster box that can support it. Just because let's say Dark Metatron is an incredibly strong leader, if you have none of the cards whatsoever to support her, she's going to be useless by comparison to something else that you actually can field a team for. So, one thing that you need to have is a high attack multiplier. We need to deal damage to kill things. Like, if we're not killing things, it doesn't matter how tanky or durable we are, it's just not going to happen. So, for example, the low end is 144 times, and that's like Edward, or pre-buff Edward, I should say, Vraska, Beach Barber, and Julie. They all have low multipliers, but the cards themselves have high effective damage. With Edward, or pre-buff Edward and Vraska, they both have double 7 combos, so that 144 times attack is propelled up to 576 times effective damage with their double 7 combo awakenings, so you have to kind of keep that in mind. Like, if your leader has a lower multiplier, do they have strong offensive awakenings to kind of help offset that? Conversely, does your leader have a high multiplier but no personal damage awakenings? That's going to definitely lower your overall team damage output. Like, for example, Anubis has a high multiplier, but he himself has no personal damage, so that can be a bit of a drawback, and depending on the type of team you utilize, it could possibly run into issues. The next and perhaps most important aspect is activation consistency. I'm going to be bashing on Anubis quite a bit here because he was kind of the poster child of glass cannon leaders from the past. Because essentially, Anubis has an incredibly high attack multiplier, but he has horrible activation consistency on a 6x5 board. In the past, you need like 10 or 9 combos to really activate. Now it's 8, so it's still more doable, but a given board has 7 to 8 combos on average, so you are running into consistency issues. So if you cannot activate from an average given board on a regular basis, you are going to struggle. You might have to use active skills or stall out problematic mechanics. It's just not a good position to be in. So you have to either find ways to improve that activation consistency or even just use a new leader overall. So for Anubis, the best workaround solution is to simply use a 7x6 pairing, and that way you can always hit 8 combos and at least tap into damage and hopefully sweep content. Another thing to keep in mind with activation consistency are those leaders that require multiple colors to actually activate. This is usually most prevalent for those that require, say, 2 fire combos, 2 wood combos, 2 of the same type of color is harder to achieve because on a 6x5 board, statistically speaking, you will have 6 different elements. So 30 divided by 6 is 5 of each type of orb. So statistically speaking, you're most likely not going to have those, like say 6 fires or 2 fire combos that you do require. So that can be a little problematic. Now we come to durability. So despite the fact that we have leader skills that have amazingly high multipliers, we need to be able to actually withstand and survive mechanics. Dungeons are not as straightforward as simply smash through. You have to actually hit hard, but also survive the problematic mechanics and dance your way through them. And the best way to gain durability is to have basically a combination of any of these types of durability aspects. And I will explain each of those in greater detail. So you can either have high HP, high RCV or recovery, a blend of health and recovery, or damage reduction. This is not an exhaustive list, and many leaders feature several combinations of each of these to kind of create interesting leader skills. So high HP is basically classified as leaders that, when paired together, will result in usually 4 times health. Basically, your, say, 30,000 team health is now 120,000, so you are able to withstand most hits in the game. When you pass that 145,000 threshold, you tank Goemon in Altarena, which is a big deal. And this is important because you are able to basically withstand large amounts of damage without fear of dying. You don't have to budget yourself a damage reduction active skill, so you free up an active skill slot, which is very powerful and meaningful overall. Now, in the past, these high health teams did have great issues healing back up, but we now have access to the enhanced heal orb awakenings, which have been buffed in the past several months to the point where teams with 4 times health, 1 times recovery are able to heal amazing amounts of health when they connect 4 hard orbs. When you stick on something like Mel or EIR, you can heal amazing amounts of health. And that makes high health teams arguably the best kind of template possible, unless the damage reduction is high enough and consistent enough. Speaking of damage reduction is basically the ability to reduce incoming damage by a certain percentage. So if you have, say, 50% damage reduction between 2 leaders, you have effectively 2 times health. That 50,000 damaging hit is now reduced to 25,000. So obviously the more damage reduction you have built in, the better you are able to tank large amounts of damage. So a 75% damage reduction shield is equivalent to 4 times health, so it does definitely ramp up very quickly. Edward is 57.75%, which I can't remember mathematically what that translates into, but that's a high amount of effective health for sure. So these types of damage reductions are better than high health, assuming you could survive every hit in that dungeon, just because of the fact that gravities are less dangerous. 99% gravities are obviously terrible for high health teams with only 1 times recovery because they have to heal up so much, but gravities that deal, say, 100% of your health will instantly kill you no matter how much health you have. You could have 200,000 health, you get hit by 100% gravity, you are dead regardless. Whereas damage reduction style leader skills make you survive those, and you survive them comfortably. So that is a big deal. Like Edward, for instance, at 57% reduction will get hit by 100% gravity and still be above 50% health, which is wonderful assuming you start at full health. So this is definitely important, but of course, high health leaders tend to be more effective overall because they have more effective health unless you have that 75% damage reduction. High RCV used to be important back in the day because at the time we didn't have outrageously large preemptives we had to survive. You could definitely survive those preemptives, and the issue was just being able to heal back up. So having that RCV multiplier was important. But at this day and age, it's not as amazing as it used to be, simply because the enhanced Heal Orb Awakenings are so efficient at what they do that leaders with no health multiplier or no damage reduction and high RCV are less potent than they used to be. Like, Riku is a good example of kind of a hybrid. Riku has damage reduction and high RCV, so he has potentially strong effective health and bonkersly high amounts of recovery. High RCV is definitely very valuable against poison Skyfall encounters where poison resist awakenings don't actually block them occurring, so you can match those poison orbs without fear of actually killing yourself. And then lastly is kind of a blend of health and recovery. This is well exemplified by something like Yusuke. Yusuke has 2.25 times health recovery. It's a nice mixture. Assuming you can survive all incoming reasonable hits, it's very efficient because you have the health, you have the recovery. You don't necessarily have to budget a sub with the enhanced Heal Orb Awakenings. You should be able to heal enough. And then you can modify your health in solo mode with the badges of RCV or health. So these types of blended teams are nice, but like I said, generally speaking, the best types are those with the 4 times health because they can tank all the preemptives in Alt Arena. Now, let's say you've now picked your chosen leader based off kind of those credentials, so to speak. We now need to understand what are the common and dangerous mechanics in the dungeon because, again, you need to counter them. Like I said, it's not quite like rock, paper, scissors, but it kind of is to a certain extent. You want to find the best way to counter the mechanic without jeopardizing too much of the dungeon. So, for example, let's say there's a certain mechanic that you find yourself having issues with. How many solutions do you have to bring to counter that mechanic? And if you're bringing too many counters to that one mechanic, you might be vulnerable to other things in the dungeon. If that's the case, maybe that is not the right team to be bringing. So again, this is not an exhaustive list of all the possible mechanics in the game, but what I find are the more problematic and common ones that you encounter on a regular basis. So the first is damage absorption, which is arguably the most hated mechanic in the game, because damage absorption basically means that if you hit a spawn above a certain threshold, they will heal instead of taking damage. That means all the work you have done in hitting that monster down will be undone, and that is not a pleasant feeling. Like, for example, Sopdet is a spawn that absorbs 200,000 or more. So, yes, you can bring leaders with damage control, like no Skyfalls or a scaling multiplier, but RNGesus will probably bless you with lots of Skyfalls if you didn't have no Skyfalls, so that can just undo all the work you did. You get executed. So, that is problematic. And at this point in time, most leaders now have way too much damage that we can't actually damage control them nowadays. And that is a little problematic and or frustrating. So, to kind of overcome this, Gung Ho has released Fujin style active skills which negate the damage absorption for a single turn. So basically, you pop your Fujin style active skill, you can hit as hard as you want, you can kill the spawn. It is a very annoying mechanic in all honesty, but at least there is a counter to it. And in theory, you usually only need 1 Fujin per dungeon, and technically you can bring a friend who has Fujin inherited, so that can solve those problems there. Now, lastly, damage absorption spawns will have this pink shield beside them, whereas damage voids will have a gray/silver shield. Damage void is much more pleasant by comparison because damage void will reduce damage down to 1 if it exceeds the threshold. So you don't lose your progress, which is much more pleasant overall. Like, it just kind of gets reduced down and nothing really happens. It's much more doable overall, but and it's also easier to deal with, quote unquote, because you only need awakenings. You don't need to dedicate a specific active skill. And the best way to do so, you can use damage control, but in all honesty, the best way to do so is use void damage penetration awakenings. And this basically means you form a 3x3 box, and the cards that own the VDP awakening will be able to pierce through that damage void shield. Only the VDP cards will be dealing damage, so you have to obviously hit high enough levels, but if you bring the appropriate orb changers, board changers, bursts, so on and so forth, you should be able to pierce through and actually execute the spawn. Much more manageable and easy to deal with by comparison to something like damage absorption, which needs usually an active skill as a direct counter. Another popular mechanic I've seen that can be detrimental is Jammer/Poison Skyfalls. Basically, the boss you encounter has them raining down from the sky. Your Jammer and Poison Resist Awakenings are useless, and the only way to actually stop this is either use a leader who does not as heavily impacted by having Jammer or Poison Orbs on the board, or use a base like Dark Fenrir active skill to basically cause Jammer Skyfalls, which will override the Jammers and Poisons done by the boss. It only lasts 1 turn, much more manageable to deal with overall. it's a solution I find myself using on a regular basis for certain challenge dungeons. Next are poison encounters. So basically the best way to deal with this is the poison resist awakening. Basically the spawns will attack you and generate poison orbs from the orbs on the board. Each poison resist awakening provides a 20% reduction, and using something like the weapon assist from Raytheon gives you 60%. So weapon assist Raytheon and then something else that adds up to 40% will give you full immunity. That can trivialize that spawn, something like Sevenzard who spawns poison orbs, and that is his main dangerous mechanic. So being able to resist those is invaluable. Next is Resolve, and basically Resolve is one of the older abilities that we had to deal with damage control or gravities in the past, but nowadays we can utilize the follow-up attack awakening to basically form a column of hard orbs, which will allow you to deal 1 damage after you've dealt and push the enemy down to 1, because when a spawn has Resolve, they survive with 1 health, so normally they survive 1 health, execute you. Now you can follow-up attack, kill it, leave it with 1 health, follow-up attack, pings for 1, dead. Resolve spawns have become so commonplace nowadays that it's almost impossible not to bring a team with a follow attack card because they're so commonplace, and it's just the easiest way to deal with it. It's so clean and tidy, and in my opinion was one of the better design mechanics overall because it's a pretty clean solve. You don't need to use orb changes or active skills excessively because 5 hearts should at least be doable from most given boards. No status shields. So this is kind of the opposite of mechanic. It's a lack of a mechanic because status shields are basically things that the bosses can throw up that will basically prevent you from delaying, poisoning, or defense breaking them. But even in this day and age, there are still plenty of dangerous spawns that can be delayed, poisoned, or defense broken. And this is important. So if they are able to be delayed or defense broken or poisoned, it can be beneficial to bring something like that. So, for example, let's say we're facing Gaia, like the fully evolved Gaia in whatever Altarina or whatever else she spawns. She has like 40 million defense. She also has the ability to stop you from actually matching a specific color. That can be problematic, of course, but you can delay her. And when you delay her, you wait out that color blocking match mechanic so you can kill her. Conversely, you can use a defense break. You can defense break her down to 0, negate that 40 million defense, and just kill her very easily. So there are a couple of clean ways to deal with spawns with no status shield. Delays, poisons, or defense breaking are nice. Defense break the Metatrons in 3-player Arena 1 or Altarina makes your life much easier. And speaking of high defense is another interesting mechanic. So high defense basically means that if you don't deal enough damage to overcome their defense value, you don't deal anything at all, which is obviously problematic. But if they have high defense, you can either find ways to burst your way through by stacking, like, say, 7 combos, burst active skills, or killer awakenings, or you can use defense breaks if they don't have a status shield. Defense breaks reduce them down to 0. They're easy to kill at that point in time. And then lastly are Awoken Binds. So Awoken Binds are, I guess, somewhat of a new mechanic. And basically what happens is the monster, you cannot resist in any way. It's not like skill bind attacks which you can resist. But Awoken Binds will disable all your awakening skills. So all your time extends, 7 combos, bind immunities are all canceled out. That is problematic, and depending on the spawn and their moveset and the type of team you're using, you may need to bring an Awoken Bind clearing active skill to counter that right away. Because let's say they disable your Awoken skills and then they're going to bind you. They could bind your whole team and then you're just going to die. That's a problem right there. So obviously check to make sure there are no Awoken Binds, and if they have Awoken Binds, what is your solution for them? Because you have to use an active skill. So these are what I consider the stronger leaders at this point in time in Puzzle & Dragons. Again, this is not an exhaustive list, and I do plan to expand this section in the future for both the leaders listed here as well as a bit more detailed information for each leader. But at this point in time, all these 4 leaders of Yusuke, Beach Barber, and Julie, Dark, Metatron, and Edward all share the common traits of high damage, high durability, and basically relatively easy to play at the same time because they have activation consistency. So again, a leader is only as strong as your monster box and sub pool to support them. Just because Dark Mantastic is great, if you don't have the subs, she's not going to be great. So Yusuke is probably the most common leader I'd say right now in Puzzle & Dragons because he's the very first one that could be acquired via the Monster Exchange system, and he was incredibly powerful upon release and is still, in all honesty, amazingly powerful at this point in time. He's a blended leader of health and recovery of 2.25 times, so tanky, durable, can heal back up, as well as featuring high 225 times damage with double 7 combo and VDP. He solves lots of problems on his own right there. And his team building requirements are basically just use light cards with 7 combo awakenings. So this is not an exhaustive list, but things like Ideal, the Cottons, Odin Dragon, Edward, Tachibanas, Yunas, Amatsus are all amazingly powerful subs on his team. And because his activation is so simple, just need to match water, light, and 7 combos total, you can kind of bring what you need for the dungeon at hand. His active skill generates a board changer, so you basically just kind of fill in, like, where are the problem mechanics? Where are you going to find problems? Just fill in your sub and utilize inherits accordingly. That's going to apply to every single leader and team in Puzzle and Dragons. Next is Beach Barbara and Julie, or BJ for short, and they come from the Beach Rareg machine, and they're incredibly powerful despite the fact that they only have 144 times attack. But she has 6 natural killer awakenings and can gain a 7th one through her super awakening. So Beach Barbara and Julie actually has huge amounts of personal damage. Against dual typing spawns, that's going to be 9 times damage. Triple typing spawns, 27 times. They are going to die a very painful and spectacular death. So she has huge amounts of damage output because of that. But she provides 4 times health for your team, so she's incredibly durable. And like I already mentioned before, 4 times health with 1 times recovery is solved by something like Mel or double Kuro Yuris. Basically, they are healing solutions that provide consistency to replenish your health should you take large amounts of damage on a regular basis. Again, some cards include, for strong subs but not limited to, Cotton, Blue Cotton of course, Amatsu, Enra. You can use blue or red cards. Mel, Kuriori, I can't say her name still, Joyra, Reincarnated Ionai, Beach Fujin, and Gabriel. All of these cards provide you high amounts of power for your team. They provide either beneficial active skills or awakenings that have synergy. And generally speaking, Beach Barbara and Julie teams want to basically run fire or water cards with 7 combo. One thing I want to mention is that Enra is red based, and that is important because blue will have a tough time against green spawns. But if you have an Enra on your team, Enra will smash through those green spawns because they have 2 times effective damage as well instead of water. So basically, if you're fighting a wood spawn, Enra has basically 4 times more damage than your water spawn because water is 50%, Enra is 2 times. 4 times difference right there. Dark Metatron is now oftentimes considered the strongest leader in the game because she has 4 times health and 43.75% damage reduction, which is the highest effective amount of health in the game at this point in time. So she is unbelievably durable, and even though she has to be below 80% to deal damage, you have ways to do so through Izanagi and her base active skill. Unfortunately, Dark Metatron has one of the more strict team building requirements because she has to use god type cards, and ideally they're light or dark based, and she tends to have an issue of time extends because if you're running the kind of core setup for her, you tend to have lower amounts of movement time if you don't have planar. So with that 4 times health, 43.75% damage reduction, you can tank any hit in the game if you're full health. Even when you're low health, you can tank most hits anyways. Like, it's pretty spectacular overall. The healing aspect is solved by EIR, which is kind of a core sub. She's basically the dark equivalent to Mel, but with less enhanced healer awakenings. And in terms of the core team composition, you want to use an Izanagi because Izanagi has a 3-turn active skill which resets your health to 50%, so you instantly push yourself into the zone to kill things, as well as being able to inherit something over top of it. It's kind of irreplaceable. There's nothing that does this job better, and that's a bit of a problem there. EIR is farmable, so everyone can acquire her. She's another core sub you want to have because it solved your healing problems. And lastly is something with follow-up attack, and that is basically always in an ideal world going to be Planar, because Planar has double 7 combo with Super Awakenings and triple time extends. Solves the time extend issue, has big damage. Best follow-up attack option possible. But barring all those, it may be hard to build an effective team if you don't have at least Izanagi EIR. You can use other follow-up attack options, of course. And even if you don't have the perfect team of Dark Metatron, the fact that she is so powerful, and if you are able to make 7 combos on a regular basis, which is doable, barring time extend issues, she is amazing and can clear plenty of content. And her subpool includes, but not limited to, Kami, Miru, Reincarnated Ionai for the dark boost, as well as God typing and RCV bonus that can be a healing solution as well. New Year's Yomi, regular Yomi for time extends, Oku, and Durga. Again, you want obviously use Izanagi, EIR, and Planar. And lastly, we come to Edward. So I talked about Edward heavily in my Full Metal Alchemist review, but Edward received a huge buff to his leader skill and his own personal damage output because now he has 777 combo via Super Awakenings. But his leader skill is now 196 times attack, while also having 57.75% damage reduction when above 50% health. So as long as your health is above 50%, you enjoy this huge amount of damage reduction. So you have a large amount of effective health, and in co-op mode, you should be able to tank all preemptives in the game, which is wonderful, of course, because you basically free yourself up a shielding slot, and you're really not going to die, because it's hard to really chunk yourself down that much. Like, let's say your team is 50,000 health. It's going to take a pretty large hit to push you below 50%. And you have healing active solutions as well through his own base active and possible subs you bring. So team building for Edward is going to look very similar to Yusuke, with the exception that Edward can use any subs. So you can, in theory, use a card that does not have any light attribute. It's preferred because Edward's active skill synergizes with light-based cards, but of course you have a bit more flexibility there. However, in that same breath, you also are a little bit more restricted, quote-unquote, because you want to have full rainbow coverage in order to proc his skill charge to abuse Edward's base active skill on a more regular basis. So subs that have, say, a sub-attribute of a different color are naturally preferred. Like, Ideal has light and dark, so she's the light, which is great, and the dark to cover the dark, and then you fill in the rest. Edward already has fire. So some Ideal cards include, but not limited to, Ideal, Blue and Light Cotton, Odin Dragon, Yusuke, Tachibana, Yuna, Amatsu, Light Nei, and Knees. So again, pretty similar to Yusuke. So, team building for a dungeon. Like, as mentioned before, like, kind of take these team building templates as what they are. Templates. They're not absolute truths. You have to modify your inherits and team composition for the dungeon at hand. There is no kind of one team solves all problems, so to speak. Like, you have to be able to analyze a dungeon and apply your own team building skills in order to overcome it. Again, this is a puzzling game, and it's kind of a bit like rock, paper, scissors at the same time. So, assuming you have strong orb movement skills, using the right team now becomes the bigger issue at this point in time. So, in conclusion, team building in Puzzle & Dragons is a vital skill to learn and master, because using the right team for the dungeon will make you have significantly higher clear rates and more consistency and more speed overall. Let me know what you think about this article in the comments below. Do you like these types of postings? Do you want to see more of this in the future? I do plan on expanding kind of these sections here and the types of leaders that I want to include. So again, in the comments, let me know what type of leaders you want to see included in a subsequent posting in the future. Hopefully you all have a Mantastic day. I wish you all the best luck in your own pad adventures, and happy puzzling.